The silent test of strength. The evening sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and crimson as Carla drove down the desolate highway. Her old sedan hummed steadily, a faithful companion through the countless miles she had traveled that day. It had been a long one, exhausting meetings, endless traffic, and a persistent headache that no amount of aspirin could chase away. But now, with the windows down and the warm breeze tussling her hair, she felt a sliver of peace creeping back in. The highway stretched out before her, seemingly endless, bordered by barren fields that whispered secrets to the wind. Carla's GPS chimed, directing her to the nearest gas station, and she sighed in relief. Her fuel gauge was perilously close to empty. She could almost taste the cold drink she planned to grab once she filled up. As she pulled into the gas station, it seemed to materialize out of nowhere, a lonely outpost of flickering fluorescent lights and aging pumps. The scent of diesel lingered in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of wild sage from the open fields nearby. Carla parked her silver Camry beside one of the pumps and stepped out, letting the warmth of the summer night envelop her. The station was eerily quiet, save for the hum of cicadas and the faint rustling of leaves. Carla liked it that way, peaceful, uncomplicated. She began fueling her car, her thoughts wandering to the day ahead. Maybe once she was home, she'd treat herself to a glass of wine and her favorite book. She was so lost in her musings that she almost didn't notice the low, ominous growl of engines in the distance. At first, it barely registered, a faint rumble, like distant thunder. But as the sound grew louder, she glanced toward the highway, her stomach tightening instinctively. 6 motorcycles appeared on the horizon, their headlights piercing through the gathering dusk. They moved like a pack of wolves, synchronized and purposeful, their engines snarling as they approached the station. Carla stiffened. The peaceful solitude of the gas station was about to be shattered. The bikers pulled in, their arrival heralded by the echo of crunching gravel beneath heavy tires. They parked in a tight formation near the convenience store, their machines gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Each man dismounted with a practiced ease, their leather jackets adorned with patches and insignias Carla didn't recognize. She kept her head down, focusing on the rhythm of the gas pump. Stay calm. Mind your business. But the weight of their presence was impossible to ignore. They were loud, their voices carrying across the empty lot as they joked and laughed with an edge that made her skin crawl. Carla finished fueling and replaced the nozzle, her movements steady despite the quickening beat of her heart. She glanced toward the store, debating whether to risk walking past them to pay for her gas. One of the men, a burly figure with a grizzled beard and a bandana, caught her eye. He nudged his companion, muttering something that made the others chuckle. Ignoring them, Carla squared her shoulders and headed toward the store. Each step felt heavier than the last, her senses hyper-aware of the 6 pairs of eyes tracking her every move. She pushed open the glass door, the bell above it jingling weakly. Inside, a young cashier sat behind the counter, engrossed in his phone. He barely looked up as Carla approached, muttering a disinterested "hi." Carla offered a curt nod, paid for her gas, and grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler. The return journey to her car felt even longer. The bikers had spread out, leaning casually against their motorcycles, their conversation pausing as she passed. She could feel their gazes on her, heavy and deliberate. "Hey, sweetheart," one of them called out, his voice dripping with mockery. Carla's stomach clenched, but she didn't stop. "Too good to say hi." Another one jeered, followed by a chorus of laughter. Reaching her car, Carla slid into the driver's seat and locked the door with a flick of her thumb. Her hands trembled as she started the engine. Through the windshield, she saw the men watching her, their expressions a mix of amusement and challenge. Just as she prepared to drive away, the tallest of the group, a man with mirrored sunglasses that reflected the gas station's flickering lights, stepped forward. He slapped a hand on the hood of her car, making her flinch despite herself. "Where you headed in such a hurry, huh?" he drawled, his voice calm but menacing. Carla met his gaze through the glass, her expression unreadable. Her instincts screamed at her to hit the accelerator and leave them in the dust, but she hesitated. Something told her that running would only embolden them. The man leaned closer, his breath fogging the driver's side window. "Didn't your mama teach you manners?" he asked, his tone dripping with false politeness. "We're just being friendly." Carla rolled the window down a fraction, enough to let her voice carry, but not enough to let him get too close. "I'm not looking for trouble," she said evenly. "Just passing through." "Trouble," he echoed, feigning innocence. "Now, why would you think we cause trouble?" Behind him, his companions laughed again, their voices grating against her nerves. Carla tightened her grip on the steering wheel, willing herself to stay calm. "Look," she said, her tone firm, "I've had a long day. I just want to get home." The man smirked, his mirrored sunglasses hiding whatever thoughts were swirling behind them. "Well, that's too bad," he said, "because we're not done talking." Carla's heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained stoic. She knew this was a test, a game of control. If she showed fear, they would seize on it, but if she stood her ground. She took a deep breath, her mind racing as she prepared to do something she never thought she'd have to do. The bikers had underestimated her, mistaking her silence for submission. They didn't know that Carla had faced challenges far greater than this, and that she had no intention of letting them win. The line she would not cross. The air around the gas station seemed to grow heavier as the man with the mirrored sunglasses leaned in closer. His smirk widened when Carla didn't immediately respond to his challenge. His hand slid from her hood to the edge of her car window, the tap of his ring against the glass echoing in the tense silence. "You know," he began, his voice low but deliberate, "it's not polite to ignore people trying to make conversation." Behind him, his crew of bikers chuckled, their voices a low, sinister murmur. Carla's gaze flicked to the rearview mirror, noting one of the men casually circling to the back of her car. Another stood to her right, just beyond the passenger door, tapping his boot on the gravel with deliberate slowness. They were closing in like wolves, their casual postures masking the calculated precision of predators. Carla exhaled through her nose, her pulse pounding in her ears, but her outward calm didn't falter. She had always prided herself on her ability to think under pressure. It was a skill honed by years of dealing with corporate boardrooms, heated negotiations, and situations where maintaining composure meant the difference between success and disaster. And tonight, she would draw on every ounce of that experience. "I'm not interested in conversation," she said, her voice steady but firm, each word deliberate. "Now step away from my car." Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made even the man with the sunglasses hesitate for a split second. The smirk on his face faltered before twisting into a sneer. "Feisty," he said, leaning back slightly. "I like that." Carla's fingers brushed against her phone on the passenger seat, but she didn't grab it yet. Instead, she met the man's gaze, or at least her own reflection in his mirrored lenses. She refused to let him see fear. "You're wasting your time," she said. "Whatever game you're playing, I'm not interested." The laughter behind him died down, replaced by a tense silence. The men exchanged glances, the weight of Carla's defiance slowly sinking in. She wasn't the trembling, intimidated figure they had expected, and that unexpected resistance made them uneasy. The wiry man with the snake tattoo stepped forward from the shadows, his expression darkening. "You've got a smart mouth," he said, his voice sharper than the others. "Think you're better than us." Carla shifted slightly in her seat, keeping her posture relaxed but ready. "No," she replied evenly. "But I'm smarter than to waste my time on this nonsense." That struck a nerve. The man lunged forward, slamming his hand on her trunk. The loud thud made her heart skip, but her face betrayed nothing. The man with the sunglasses raised a hand, stopping him. "Relax," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "She's just playing tough. Aren't you, sweetheart?" Carla's lips pressed into a thin line. She decided then that she couldn't wait for them to decide their next move. She needed to act, not rashly, but decisively. Her mind raced through her options, and then, as if on instinct, an idea came to her. Slowly, deliberately, Carla reached for her purse. She noticed the slight tension in the man with the sunglasses as he straightened, his eyes narrowing. "What's that?" he asked, his tone hardening. "You got something in there you want to share?" Carla's hand moved with measured precision. She wasn't searching for a weapon. She didn't carry one. But the truth didn't matter. The important thing was what they thought. She pulled out her phone, holding it up where they could see the screen. The bright glow illuminated the word "recording" in bold letters. The reaction was immediate. The man with the sunglasses stiffened, his jaw tightening. Behind him, the wiry man cursed under his breath, while the others exchanged uneasy looks. Their bravado wavered as the realization hit them. They were being documented. "You think that's gonna save you?" The wiry man spat, but his voice lacked the confidence it had before. Carla tilted her head slightly, her expression calm but unyielding. "Maybe," she said, "or maybe it'll just make your lives a lot more complicated." She pressed the phone to her chest, ensuring it couldn't be snatched away easily, and continued, "I'm sure the police will love seeing this. What do you think they'll say when I show them how a group of men tried to corner a lone woman at a gas station?" The tall man's smirk disappeared entirely, replaced by a cold glare. "You've got some nerve," he said, his voice low. But the hesitation in his stance betrayed him. "And you've got some bad judgment," Carla replied, her words sharp. "This is over. Walk away." The tension was almost tangible now, the balance of power shifting with each passing second. The bikers were no longer in control of the situation. And they knew it. Their posturing had failed, their intimidation met with unshakable resolve. For the first time that night, Carla saw doubt in their eyes. But she didn't stop there. She knew that hesitation could turn to anger, and anger could lead to recklessness. She needed to end this decisively. "I don't know who you think you're messing with," she said, her voice rising slightly. "But let me make one thing clear. I'm not the one you should be afraid of tonight. You should be afraid of what happens when that recording gets out." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. The older couple who had just pulled into the station noticed the scene unfolding and lingered near their car, their presence adding another layer of discomfort for the bikers. Witnesses, more eyes watching, more risk. The man with the sunglasses stepped back, his hands raised slightly. "All right, lady," he said, his tone laced with frustration. "We're done here." The wiry man looked like he wanted to argue, but a sharp glare from his leader stopped him. One by one, the bikers retreated to their motorcycles, their movements stiff with barely concealed anger. The rumble of their engines filled the night air as they mounted their bikes, their departure marked by the sound of tires kicking up gravel. Carla didn't move until the last taillight disappeared down the highway. Only then did she let out the breath she had been holding, her body trembling from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The older man from the couple approached cautiously. "Ma'am," he said, his voice kind but concerned, "are you all right?" Carla nodded, managing a small smile. "I am now. Thank you." As she climbed back into her car and pulled back onto the highway, her mind raced with thoughts of what had just happened. She wasn't shaken. She was resolute. The experience had tested her limits, but it had also reaffirmed something she had almost forgotten. Her strength, her courage, her refusal to back down in the face of injustice. The road stretched on before her, but Carla drove with a newfound clarity. She wasn't just going home. She was carrying with her a lesson, a story of resilience and defiance that she knew needed to be shared. Reflection on the road. The hum of the engine was the only sound as Carla drove down the empty stretch of highway. Her knuckles were still white from gripping the steering wheel, though the tension in her shoulders had begun to ease. The bikers were gone, their threats no longer immediate, but the confrontation replayed itself in her mind like a relentless reel of film. Each word, each movement, was seared into her memory. The way the leader's smirk twisted into a sneer when she didn't back down. The brief flicker of hesitation in his mirrored sunglasses when he realized she was recording, and the look of quiet shock on the wiry one's face when she refused to run. Carla had faced fear head-on tonight and had come out on the other side, stronger. The quiet glow of her phone screen lit up in the passenger seat, where the recording of the entire encounter remained saved. It was tempting to delete it, to let the night fade into obscurity. But every time she reached for the device, her hand stopped short. This wasn't just her story anymore. It was a story of defiance, of refusing to be a victim. She thought about the bikers' faces as they'd realized the tide had turned. For years, men like them had used intimidation as a weapon, counting on the silence of their targets. But Carla hadn't been silent. She'd stood her ground, and though the night had ended without violence, she knew it could have gone differently. The burden of courage. Pulling into a small diner on the outskirts of the next town, Carla decided to take a moment to gather herself. The bright neon sign above the diner flickered faintly, casting a warm glow over the parking lot. Inside, only a few patrons lingered. A truck driver nursing a cup of coffee, a waitress wiping down tables, and an elderly couple sharing a slice of pie. Carla slid into a booth by the window, the faint hum of country music playing in the background. She ordered a tea, her hands trembling slightly as she brought the warm cup to her lips. The heat grounded her, its comforting warmth a sharp contrast to the chill that had gripped her earlier. As she stared out the window at the empty parking lot, Carla's thoughts drifted to other moments in her life when she'd been tested. There was the time she'd stood up to a bully in high school, refusing to let him humiliate a classmate in front of the entire cafeteria. Or the time she'd confronted her former boss over his inappropriate behavior, risking her job to protect her dignity. Each of those moments had felt monumental at the time. But tonight was different. Tonight, she had been alone, outnumbered, and far from any semblance of safety. Yet, she had chosen to stand firm. Her phone buzzed again, raking her train of thought. It was her sister Denise, texting to check in. "Denise, are you okay? Text me when you're home." Carla smiled faintly, typing a quick reply. "Carla, I'm okay. Long night, but I'm fine. Love you." Her finger hovered over the keyboard. She hesitated, wondering if she should tell Denise what had happened. But how could she explain it without making her sister worry? Instead, she opened her camera roll and reviewed the recording. Watching it felt surreal, her own voice steady, her body language composed, even as her heart had been pounding. The footage wasn't perfect, shaky in places, but it was enough. It captured the bikers' sneers, their taunts, and their eventual retreat. As she replayed the scene, something dawned on her. This recording wasn't just for her. It was for every person who had ever been cornered, every woman who had felt powerless in the face of aggression. It was a reminder that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was standing tall despite it. A stranger's wisdom. Rough night. The waitress's voice pulled Carla from her thoughts. She looked up to see a woman in her late 40s, her hair pulled back into a practical ponytail, her kind eyes studying Carla with quiet concern. "You could say that," Carla replied with a small smile. The waitress set a slice of pie on the table without being asked. "On the house," she said. "You look like you could use it." Carla laughed softly, the tension in her chest loosening. "Thanks." As the waitress walked away, the elderly man from the booth across the diner spoke up. "You look like someone who just stared down a storm," he said, his voice rough but warm. Carla turned to him, surprised by the observation. "You could say that," she said again. The man nodded thoughtfully. "You handled it, though. I can see it in your eyes. You're still standing." There was a depth to his words that struck Carla. She hesitated before responding, unsure of how much to share, but something about the man's calm demeanor encouraged her to speak. "Some guys at the last gas station," she said, keeping her tone casual, "thought they could scare me. They didn't." The man's expression didn't change, but his eyes softened. "That takes strength," he said, "more than most people realize." Carla took a sip of her tea, the warmth spreading through her. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it," she admitted. "Standing up, I mean. It feels like it never changes anything." The man chuckled. A deep, rumbling sound. "Oh, it changes things, all right. Maybe not for the world, but for the next person they try to mess with. You planted a seed of doubt in their minds tonight. They'll think twice before pulling that nonsense again." Carla considered his words, letting them sink in. The idea that her actions could have a ripple effect, even if she never saw it, brought her a sense of peace she hadn't expected. "Thank you," she said quietly. The man tipped his hat. "Don't thank me, miss. Thank yourself. You did the hard part." The road ahead. As Carla left the diner, the weight on her shoulders felt lighter. The night air was cool, the stars above twinkling like silent witnesses to the day's events. She climbed into her car, her movements slower now, more deliberate. The recording on her phone was still there, waiting for her decision. She thought about the man's words, the waitress's kindness, and the strangers who had unknowingly reminded her of her own strength. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before she opened the Contacts app and selected a name. The voice on the other end answered quickly. "This is Officer Harlan." "Hi, officer," Carla began, her voice steady. "I need to report an incident." As she recounted the events of the night, a sense of purpose filled her. She wasn't just standing up for herself anymore. She was standing up for everyone who couldn't, or wouldn't, speak out. When the call ended, Carla placed her phone back on the seat and pulled onto the highway, the road ahead illuminated by her headlights. This time, she didn't feel alone. She carried with her the strength of her actions, the wisdom of strangers, and the hope that her story would inspire others to do the same. The highway stretched endlessly into the night, but Carla drove forward with unwavering resolve, turning fear into power. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds of Carla's modest apartment, casting long streaks of warmth across her living room. She sat on the couch, her phone balanced in her hand as she replayed the events of the previous night in her mind. Sleep had come reluctantly, her thoughts tangled with what-ifs and lingering adrenaline. Yet, as the new day began, something deeper than exhaustion drove her forward, a quiet determination. Carla stared at the saved recording on her phone, her thumb hovering over the play button. The temptation to watch it again was strong, but she resisted. She didn't need to relive it to know its importance. What mattered now was what came next. She opened her laptop, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard. Sharing what had happened felt daunting, exposing. But Carla knew that silence wouldn't protect anyone, not herself, and certainly not the countless others who might find themselves in a similar situation. With a deep breath, she began typing, a voice among many. The first message Carla sent was to Officer Harlan, the policeman she'd spoken to the night before. She uploaded the recording and detailed the events, careful to note the time, location, and the bikers' descriptions. She hesitated before clicking send, the weight of what she was doing pressing down on her. What if nothing came of it? What if they dismissed her? But then she thought about the man with the mirrored sunglasses and the way he had leaned into her window, certain she would cower. That thought was enough to steel her resolve. She hit send and exhaled. The second message was harder. Carla crafted an email to a local women's advocacy group, explaining her story in careful detail. She attached the video and offered it as a resource for teaching others how to stand firm in the face of intimidation. She didn't frame herself as a hero. She simply told the truth. By the time she finished, it was past noon. Her stomach growled, a reminder that she hadn't eaten, but the sense of accomplishment filled her more than any meal could. Unexpected allies. The day passed in a blur of small, deliberate actions. Carla checked her email obsessively, unsure of what kind of response she would receive, if any. But by late afternoon, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "Ms. Reyes," a voice asked when she answered. "Yes, this is Carla," she replied cautiously. "This is Detective Sanders with the County Sheriff's Office. I've reviewed the footage you sent to Officer Harlan. First, let me say how impressed I am with how you handled the situation." Carla felt a mix of relief and apprehension. "Thank you," she said. I didn't want them to get away with it. We've had reports of this group before," the detective continued. "They've been causing trouble at gas stations and roadside stops, but we've never had concrete evidence to hold them accountable. Your recording changes that." For the first time, Carla felt a flicker of hope. "So, what happens now?" "We'll be using your video to issue warnings and citations," the detective said. "And it might not hurt for you to share your story with the community. People need to see what standing up to intimidation looks like." The call ended with assurances that the matter would be taken seriously, but Carla knew the fight wasn't over. Still, the idea of sharing her story in a more public way lingered in her mind. Sharing the light. That evening, Carla sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open to a blank social media post. Writing had never been her strength, but words poured out of her as if they had been waiting for the right moment to surface. She described the events with honesty, her tone measured but firm. She didn't embellish or dramatize. She simply laid out what had happened and what she had learned. The recording wasn't included. That felt too personal, too raw. Instead, Carla focused on the bigger message: the power of standing up, the importance of using every tool available, and the need for solidarity in the face of fear. Before she could second-guess herself, she hit post. The screen refreshed, and there it was, out in the world for anyone to see. The ripple effect. Within hours, Carla's post began to circulate. Comments flooded in, some from friends and family, others from complete strangers. "You're so brave," one person wrote. "This is exactly what we need more of," said another. But the messages that struck Carla the most were the ones from women who shared their own stories. "I've been in situations like this," one message read. "I froze. Thank you for showing me it's okay to fight back." Another said, "Your story gave me the courage to report something that happened to me years ago. I don't feel so alone now." Carla read each comment with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She hadn't expected her experience to resonate so deeply. It felt surreal, but also empowering, to know that her actions had inspired others. A community rallies. Days turned into weeks, and Carla's story continued to gain momentum. Local news outlets picked it up, framing her as a symbol of quiet courage. The advocacy group she had contacted invited her to speak at an event, and though public speaking wasn't her forte, Carla accepted. Standing in front of a room filled with women from all walks of life, she felt a surge of nervous energy. But as she began to speak, that energy transformed into conviction. She told them what she had learned. That fear was inevitable, but giving in to it was not. Her words were met with applause, but what mattered most to Carla was the conversations that followed. Women approached her, their faces alight with determination, and shared their own stories of standing up to fear. The transformation. Carla's life didn't change overnight. She still went to work, still dealt with the mundane frustrations of daily life. But something inside her had shifted permanently. The fear she had felt that night at the gas station had been replaced by something far more powerful, a belief in her own strength and the strength of others. One evening, as she walked into her apartment, Carla noticed a package waiting for her. Inside was a handwritten note from a woman she'd met at the advocacy event, along with a small silver necklace engraved with the word resilient. Carla smiled, holding the necklace in her palm. The word felt like both a reminder and a promise. As she placed it around her neck, she looked in the mirror and saw not just herself, but the woman she had become, a woman who had faced fear and turned it into something unbreakable. The advocate she never thought she'd be. Carla sat in the cafe across from the local community center, nursing a cup of tea as the bustle of the world passed by outside the window. It had been 2 months since that fateful night at the gas station. What started as a terrifying encounter had become the catalyst for a journey she never anticipated. Her post about the incident had gone viral, spreading far beyond her small town. Messages poured in from women and men alike, Some shared their own experiences, others thanked her for her courage, and a few, of course, questioned her actions. But Carla had learned to focus on the positive. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She was trying to show people that standing up, even in small ways, could make a difference. Today, she was preparing for something she never imagined herself doing, leading a self-defense workshop at the community center. It wasn't her idea initially. Marissa, the director of a local women's advocacy group, had reached out after seeing her story. "You don't have to be a martial arts expert," Marissa had said during their first meeting. "What you did that night was about mental strength, not physical force." "That's the message we need to share," Carla had agreed, albeit reluctantly. She wasn't a fighter. She was just a woman who had refused to let fear dictate her actions. Still, the idea of standing in front of a room full of people felt daunting. Would they take her seriously? Would they see her as someone worth listening to? Facing new fears. The community center buzzed with activity when Carla arrived. Women of all ages gathered in the large meeting room, chatting nervously as they waited for the workshop to begin. Some were teenagers with their mothers, while others were women in their 60s or older. A few men were there as well, their presence a quiet show of support. Marissa greeted Carla with a warm smile, handing her a small microphone. "You're going to do great," she said, her tone brimming with encouragement. Carla nodded, though her stomach churned. She took a deep breath and stepped to the front of the room. As she looked out at the sea of expectant faces, a wave of doubt threatened to overwhelm her. What if she couldn't inspire them? What if they saw her as just another internet story, someone who got lucky? But then she remembered the fear she had felt that night, the way her hands had trembled on the steering wheel, the weight of the biker's stares. She thought of the countless messages she had received since then, messages from people who said her story had given them hope. That was why she was here. Carla adjusted the microphone and began to speak. 2 months ago, I didn't think I'd ever be standing in front of a group like this, she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. I'm not a martial artist or a police officer. I'm just a woman who found herself in a situation where I had to make a choice, give in to fear or stand my ground. She paused, scanning the room. The audience was silent, their eyes fixed on her. I chose to stand my ground, she continued, not because I wasn't afraid. I was terrified, but because I knew that fear couldn't be the thing that defined me. And I want you to know that you're stronger than you think, even in the scariest moments. A lesson in resilience. Carla's workshop wasn't about throwing punches or executing perfect kicks. Instead, she focused on situational awareness, de-escalation techniques, and the importance of confidence. She shared practical tips: how to use your voice to assert boundaries, how to position yourself to maintain control, and how to spot potential threats before they escalate. But the heart of her message was about mindset. Fear is natural, she said, pacing the front of the room. It's what keeps us alive. But fear doesn't have to control you. When you take a deep breath, assess the situation, and choose to act, you're taking back that control. To illustrate her point, Carla described the moments leading up to her decision to pull out her phone and start recording. I wasn't sure it would work, she admitted, but I knew I had to do something. I had to change the power dynamic, and that's what the recording did. It made them think twice. She invited participants to share their own stories, and one by one, women began to speak. A young college student recounted a time she had been followed home from a party. An older woman described a confrontation with a neighbor that had left her shaken. Each story was different, but they all carried the same thread of vulnerability and the desire to reclaim strength. By the end of the workshop, the room felt lighter. Laughter mingled with conversation as participants practiced techniques and exchanged phone numbers. Carla watched from the sidelines, a sense of quiet pride settling over her. She had doubted herself, but the workshop had proven that her experience and the lessons she had learned mattered. Ripples of change. Over the next few weeks, Carla's involvement in the community deepened. She joined the advocacy group, attended meetings, and even participated in a panel discussion on local safety initiatives. Her story became a catalyst for conversations about how to create safer spaces, not just for women but for everyone. One evening, Carla received an email from a teacher at a nearby high school. The teacher had heard about her workshops and wanted her to speak to a group of students. Carla hesitated at first. Teenagers could be a tough crowd, but she eventually agreed. Standing in front of a classroom full of young faces, Carla shared her story once again. She spoke about fear, courage, and the importance of trusting your instincts. The students listened intently, their expressions ranging from curiosity to admiration. When she finished, a girl in the front row raised her hand. "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" the girl asked. Carla considered the question carefully. "Yes and no," she said finally. "I wouldn't wish that kind of fear on anyone. But if it hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here today, sharing this with you. And if my story helps even one person feel braver, then it was worth it." The advocate's journey. Carla's life was far from perfect. She still had bad days, moments when doubt crept in, or when the weight of her new role felt overwhelming. But those moments were balanced by the connections she had made, the people she had inspired, and the growing sense of purpose that guided her. One evening, she received a letter in the mail. It was from a woman she didn't know, someone who had attended one of her workshops. The letter was simple but heartfelt. "Thank you for showing me that I can be strong. Your courage gave me the strength to face my own fears. Keep doing what you're doing. It matters more than you know." Carla read the letter twice, her eyes misting with tears. It wasn't the first message of gratitude she had received, but each one felt like a validation of her journey. She placed the letter in a box with others like it, a growing collection of reminders that even the smallest acts of courage could ripple outward, changing lives in ways she couldn't always see. As Carla prepared for bed that night, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't just a survivor of one frightening night. She was an advocate, a fighter, and a reminder that strength came in many forms. And for the first time in a long time, Carla felt truly at peace. A legacy of courage. Months had passed since Carla's confrontation at the gas station, but its ripple effects were far from over. What began as a terrifying encounter had blossomed into something far greater, a movement that she hadn't anticipated but had come to embrace. Her workshops, talks, and advocacy had become fixtures in the community, and more importantly, her story had become a beacon for others to step into their own power. The unexpected call. One rainy afternoon, Carla sat at her kitchen table, a cup of chamomile tea steaming beside her laptop. The soft patter of rain against the window was soothing as she sorted through her inbox, replying to messages from advocacy groups and local organizations. Amid the mundane emails, one stood out. The subject line read, "National Women's Empowerment Summit. Keynote Speaker Invitation." Her eyebrows shot up as she clicked the email. It was from the director of a national organization she had admired for years. They had seen her story in the media and wanted her to speak at their annual summit, an event attended by thousands of advocates, policymakers, and everyday women seeking inspiration. Carla stared at the email for a long moment. The thought of speaking on such a large stage was exhilarating and terrifying. Public speaking wasn't her natural strength, but she had learned that growth often came from stepping into discomfort. After a moment's hesitation, she hit reply and typed, "Thank you for this opportunity. I'd be honored." A bigger platform. The weeks leading up to the summit were a whirlwind of preparation. Carla worked tirelessly on her speech, crafting it with care to reflect not just her story, but the broader themes of courage, resilience, and the power of community. She wanted her words to resonate with every person in the room, to remind them that strength didn't come from the absence of fear, but from acting in spite of it. When the day of the summit arrived, Carla found herself standing backstage, heart pounding as she listened to the roar of the audience beyond the curtain. She clutched the note cards in her hands, though she had rehearsed the speech so many times she could recite it in her sleep. "You're up next," a stage manager said, offering her an encouraging smile. "You've got this." Carla nodded, taking a deep breath. As her name was announced, she stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding her. The applause was deafening, but Carla focused on the faces in the crowd, thousands of them, all waiting to hear what she had to say. She began with the story of that night at the gas station, recounting the fear, the uncertainty, and the decision to stand her ground. The room was silent, hanging on her every word. But Carla didn't stop there. She spoke about what came after, the messages from strangers, the workshops, and the lessons she had learned along the way. "I'm not here because I'm fearless," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here because I chose to act despite my fear. And that choice, your choice to act, no matter how small, has the power to change the world around you." By the time she finished, the audience was on their feet, the applause echoing in the vast auditorium. Carla's chest swelled with emotion, not from pride, but from the overwhelming sense of connection. She wasn't just telling her story anymore. She was part of something much bigger. A movement takes root. The summit marked a turning point for Carla. Her speech was shared widely online, sparking conversations about safety, empowerment, and the importance of standing up against injustice. Advocacy groups from across the country reached out, inviting her to collaborate on initiatives ranging from self-defense programs to legislative efforts aimed at protecting vulnerable communities. Carla threw herself into the work, balancing her day job with her newfound role as an advocate. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the weight of it all felt overwhelming. But each time doubt crept in, she remembered the faces of the people she had spoken to, the letters and messages of gratitude that filled her inbox, and the impact of her actions. One of the most rewarding moments came when she partnered with a local high school to create a program focused on building confidence and resilience in young women. The program combined practical safety tips with discussions about self-worth and boundaries. Watching the students transform over the course of the program filled Carla with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. From fear to legacy, Carla's life had shifted in ways she never could have predicted. She still cherished her quiet moments, reading by the window, hiking in the woods, or sipping tea on her porch. But now, those moments were balanced by a life of action, of using her voice and her story to create change. One evening, she received a message from a woman named Alina, who had been at one of her workshops. Alina explained that she had faced a similar situation at a bus stop a week earlier. Remembering Carla's advice, she had stood her ground, used her voice to draw attention, and safely diffused the situation. "I wouldn't have had the courage to do that if it weren't for you," Alina wrote. "You changed my life." Carla's eyes filled with tears as she read the message. It wasn't the first of its kind, but each one reminded her of why she kept going. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to every person who had found strength in it. The legacy of one night. As Carla looked back on the journey that had brought her here, she realized that the events of that night at the gas station had been a defining moment, not just for her but for countless others. It had taught her that courage wasn't about being unafraid. It was about choosing to act even when fear threatened to overwhelm. Her story became a book, a memoir that wove together her experiences, the lessons she had learned, and the voices of those she had inspired along the way. Titled Fearless, The Power of Standing Your Ground, the book quickly became a bestseller, its message resonating with readers around the world. Carla never sought fame or recognition, but she embraced the platform her story had given her. She used it to amplify the voices of others, to advocate for change, and to remind people everywhere that they were stronger than they realized. Moving forward, on the anniversary of that fateful night, Carla returned to the gas station. It looked much the same, a quiet outpost on a lonely stretch of highway. But she saw it differently now. To her, it was no longer a place of fear, but a place where courage had been born. She parked her car, stepped out, and stood in the warm evening air, her reflection shimmering faintly in the glass of the convenience store window. The memory of that night lingered, but it no longer weighed her down. Instead, it filled her with pride. Carla walked to the edge of the lot, looking out at the open road stretching into the distance. Her journey was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. Because now she knew that no matter the challenge, she could face it with courage, resilience, and the unshakable belief that one person's actions could create ripples of change. And she wasn't done creating those ripples yet.